Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're continuing our Cao Cao Let's Talk lore series as we pick things up with episode 4 of Act 2, titled Raising an Army. So last episode, we discussed the death of He Jin and the eradication of the eunuchs that quickly followed, before ending with Dong Zhuo's arrival in the capital. Now in today's episode, we will not be focusing on how Dong Zhuo transformed from the savior of the abducted emperor to the cruel tyrant, as this part of the story has already been covered in great depth in our Dong Zhuo lore series. So if you're interested in this, definitely go give that a look. And for our current lore series, we will instead focus on our main character, Cao Cao. Now, even before Dong Zhuo took control, the chaos that followed He Jin's death had already damaged the foundation of the Han Empire, and the delicate balance of the imperial court that was keeping things afloat is now destroyed. With both the emperor and his younger brother abducted, and most of the eunuchs killed, looting and chaos engulfed Luoyang. And within this chaos, Empress Dowager He sheltered in the depth of the imperial palace as she hid from the aftermath of her older brother's death. Meanwhile, her other stepbrother, He Miao, tried to regain control of the capital, as he was actually one of the highest ranking generals left, being the general of the chariot himself. But in a dispute with one of his lieutenants, who placed the blame of the chaos and the death of He Jin on He Miao was actually killed before he had a chance to emerge as a dominant player inside the capital. So by the time that Dong Zhuo arrived with his Xiliang cavalry, no one was really there to resist him, as all the military factions within the capital had all exhausted themselves fighting each other. First, we have the Imperial Palace Guards, which were under the command of the eunuchs, and they're now weakened and leaderless after spending the last few days fighting with Yuan Shao, Cao Cao, and Yuan Shu's forces. So soon after Dong Zhuo arrived as the savior of the emperor, they were quickly absorbed by Dong Zhuo. Then in regards to Yuan Shao and Cao Cao's forces, without the support of the emperor and He Jin, their 8 captains of the West Palace, which is technically an army for the emperor, was also disbanded and absorbed into Dong Zhuo's forces, as these captains were all reassigned to other roles under Dong Zhuo's control. Now, the story is pretty much the same for the other minor forces in the capital. For example, with He Miao's death, his forces were also quickly absorbed, and for those who tried to stand up to Dong Zhuo, like Ding Yuan, who had also come to the capital on the invitation of He Jin, much like Dong Zhuo did, the final result was largely the same, as he too was betrayed by his secretary Lu Bu, who then quickly joined Dong Zhuo's forces as Dong Zhuo's adopted son. Now, for those who survived this transition of power, the fate that awaited them was a good one, as Dong Zhuo needed people to govern for him, so for the most part, everyone received new positions. And for many officials, they were actually promoted, as Dong Zhuo, under the guidance of his 2 advisors, Wu Qiong and Zhou Bi, decided to use these promotions as an olive branch to many of the powerful clans in order for them to accept the rule of an outsider like Dong Zhuo himself. So very quickly, 5 new inspector positions were handed out. Among them, a few noteworthy ones for us to talk about is the inspector of the Ji province, Han Fu, who was really tasked with keeping an eye out on Yuan Shao, who was also promoted to an administrator job in Bohai, under Han Fu's jurisdiction. Another inspector for us to keep an eye out for is the new inspector of the Yan province to the east of the capital, as Liu Dai, a distant relative of the imperial clan, was given this key post. Now, the reason we'll focus on Liu Dai is not because he's a distant relative to the emperor, but rather because Yan province is actually where Cao Cao's hometown happened to be in. And soon after Dong Zhuo seized control, Cao Cao, who actually got a promotion back to his old job during the Yellow Turban Rebellion as the lieutenant of the cavalry, decided to flee the capital instead in early September of 189, as he fled back to his hometown, abandoning his post. Now, the reason for his sudden escape remains a mystery to history books, as when he fled, he even abandoned Lady Bian, who was the concubine that he had brought with him to the capital, along with the rest of his retainers in his home. Now, please note that all his children and his main wife, Lady Ding, had actually remained in his hometown during this whole time, so he didn't actually abandon anyone important. But eventually Lady Bian did make his way back to him, so let's ignore whatever happened there for now, and focus on what we might know about Cao Cao's escape. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the Romance of Three Kingdoms version of this tale, you might have heard about the assassination attempt on Dong Zhuo with the fabled Blade of the Seven Gems. But in reality, this event is fictional, based on the actual historical assassination by someone else instead of Cao Cao. And the episode with Cao Cao killing Lu Woshen's family on the way back is also hotly debated in various accounts in history. Now, I'm not saying that the massacre of Lu Woshen's family didn't happen, but the way it happened is definitely not how it was depicted in the Romance of Three Kingdoms. But regardless, what's important is that in September of 189, we know for a fact that Cao Cao abandoned his post and fled the capital, and thus became a fugitive to the Dong Zhuo-controlled Han government as he returned home to try to convince his father Cao Song, who has retired by now, to fund him as he wanted to recruit a rebel army to resist Dong Zhuo's regime. Now, being a sensible and crafty former official, Cao Song refused his son's demands. But also, being unable to convince his son, Cao Song, along with Cao Cao's 3 younger brothers, decided to pack up their family fortunes and escape farther east to live under the protection of Liu Rong, who was a dear friend to Cao Song and the current prince of Langya. Now, without his father's support, Cao Cao didn't exactly give up on his plan to start a rebel army, as if he had given up, his father and brothers would not need to flee either. But what Cao Cao did was he fled farther north to the Chenliu commandery to find his childhood friend Zhang Miao, who is currently the administrator there. And just from the fact that Zhang Miao didn't arrest Cao Cao on the spot for fleeing from the capital and abandoning his post, we can tell that he was actually on Cao Cao's side, at least in terms of how he felt about Dong Zhuo. And the reason for this is actually quite easy to understand if you know that the person who actually recommended Zhang Miao to his post was actually He Jin's brother He Miao. And even though He Miao has already died by this time, when Dong Zhuo entered the capital, Dong Zhuo actually used He Jin's death by the eunuchs as a reason to punish Empress Dowager He, as she stood in the way of his firm control on the emperor. So he portrayed He Jin as a hero against the eunuchs, and that Empress Dowager He and her stepbrother He Miao were actually enemies to the state, as they had a hand in tricking He Jin to go into the palace to his death. So Empress Dowager He was quickly put to death, leaving the young emperor firmly in Dong Zhuo's hand, and He Miao's dead body was actually dug up and whipped in the capital market as a form of symbolic punishment for his crime. So this act clearly was a slap across the face for everyone that was close to He Miao, such as Zhang Miao. So he naturally was against Dong Zhuo. But as a government official, Zhang Miao can't actually openly assist Cao Cao to form a rebel army. So instead, he introduced Cao Cao to a man named Wei Zi, who was a former captain in He Miao's army and the head of a wealthy clan in Chenliu. And with his financial support, Cao Cao was able to recruit his very first army, numbering 5,000 strong. And after contacting some others, like-minded administrators and inspectors from nearby land, in December of the same year, the very first version of the AntiDong Coalition was officially formed. And within this new coalition, we had members like Zhang Yang, who was a former captain of Dingyuan, and the current administrator of Henei, who is seeking revenge for the death of his former commander. And then there were the likes of Bao Xin, a former captain of He Jin, who had actually avoided all the chaos in the capital as he was away on a recruitment mission at the time. And before he was able to get back to the capital, all this chaos happened. So now, with the man that he had recruited from his said mission, he is now joining the efforts against Dong Zhuo in a way to revenge his former commander as well. And more importantly, there were other figures, namely Telmo, who was the administrator of Dong, as he would actually forge a letter pretending to be the three excellencies within the imperial court, asking all the regional officials in the land to lend a hand in removing the tyrant Dong Zhuo. Now, Cao Mao is actually quite an interesting character, as we can see him as the one to officially start this coalition against Dong Zhuo with his forged letter, but he's also the one who will officially end the coalition later down the line. But for now, we'll keep that part of the story a secret, as we'll talk about that a bit later. For now, we'll focus more on his past. Cao Mao hails from a very prestigious clan, as his granduncle, Qiao Xuan, was an extremely well-respected Confucian scholar and actually held one of the three excellency positions during Emperor Liu Hong's reign. And for years, Cao Mao himself had actually been the inspector of the entire Yan province before Liu Dai's appointment by Dong Zhuo earlier this year, which is when he switched over to becoming just the administrator of Dong. Now, this might seem like a demotion, at least on paper, but administrators actually held much more real power compared to inspectors, especially during times of war, because inspectors have no right to control armies and just facilitate what administrators can do, and administrators actually have the right to field armies ever since Yellow Turban Rebellion. So in this case, Telmo actually had much more real power compared to Liu Dai. And even in terms of soft power and connections in the region, because Telmo has been in this region for a lot longer, previously as an inspector, and plus his clan has much more influence in the area compared to Liu Dai, whose family hails from a much eastern part, he actually was much more influential in this region. And if you add on the fact that he forged this letter, he was actually the guy who eventually forced his boss, Liu Dai, to join in with the rest of them in rebelling against Dong Zhuo. So from all these, you can maybe start sensing some sort of conflict, at least on Liu Dai's side, with this overly powerful subordinate of his. But anyhow, this letter had profound effects, not only through the Yan province, but also in faraway provinces like the Ji province, where Yuan Shao soon rallied to the cause, and even the man who was actually in charge of putting Yuan Shao technically under house arrest and keeping an eye on him in Hanfu, he actually joined the cause as well after seeing so many other inspectors and administrators rallying against Dong Zhuo. So by early 190, the coalition against Dong Zhuo, or the Guangdong Coalition, as it would officially be known later on, formed, and Yuan Shao was named as its leader. And once again, we would find Cao Cao and his friend Yuan Shao working together, but this apparent unity among these coalition members will soon be tested, and even the friendship between Cao Cao and Yuan Shao will be challenged, as this war raged against Dong Zhuo would prove to be no easy task. So come back next time, as we'll continue our lore series with episode 5 of Act 2, titled Splitting Ways. And this concludes our episode here. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!